Whoops, the classic Zoom-based problem with the mute. We are live. Welcome, everybody. Well, there's nobody actually on right now, but to all of you who will see this in the future, welcome to another Banter session on YouTube Live for the Annex Sociology podcast. We got a great guest for you today. Those of you who've been with us for a while, we got a familiar and beloved face to join us, Corey Fields from Georgetown University. Welcome, Corey.
Hey.
And as always, my colleague Daniel Morrison from Abilene Christian University. Welcome, Dan.
Great to be here, Joe. Good to see you, Corey.
Nice to see you as well. It feels like getting used to old familiar things in new context. I'm like, wait, seeing faces? Normally, when I was doing this, it was all over the phone.
Right? Oh no, we're very high tech now. And a super special, we got to see she's a very busy woman. And now that she's in the C-suite, Leslie Hinkson.
I feel like the whole lesson of this discussion is going to be like, sociologists who don't want to be academics, there's a lot to recommend it and a lot valuable about it, except you don't control your time in the same kind of way.
Oh, no. Oh, she works hard. But I'm still stunned at how far she's come. Like, Leslie, I knew her when she was a grad student. Now she's like DC C-suite. So anyhow, we'll
super important lobbyist. I feel like we'll meet up for dinner and it'll be like, whoa, you're an important person. Like random people stopping to talk to you about some piece of legislation. And it's like, what? No one wants to ask me about my RSF grant? What?
Well, that's better than what I got going now, which is I can't go to the exam because I got COVID. I'm like, okay, take the exam next semester. Oh, now I don't have COVID. I misread the test. That's what I'm dealing with right now. Can't do any.
That's going around end of semester action. Grades are due tomorrow at Georgetown, and I'm like chasing after 5 or 6 students saying, please let me help you. And it's like, why don't I just give them zeros for these missed assignments? But
are you noticing a big drop off in the post? Because this is our first semester fully back, and I'm stunned by the drop in skills. Like, students are not used to being live. And definitely they were at a different university experience when they were online. It's funny. Are you noticing anything?
No, I mean, honestly, so I guess a little bit of preface on that. I had a really positive Zoom university experience compared to what I heard from a lot of friends and like saw people saying on social media. I actually found that so what I did at Zoom essentially broke up my bigger classes into like smaller Zoom groups that we'd meet and just like talk, right? As opposed to me lecturing on Zoom or whatever. And so I feel like, the level of engagement was actually much higher. Like I felt like students were at home and sick of talking to their parents and dealing with their little siblings or whatever. And so like sitting on a Zoom with 6 other classmates talking about, I don't know, Marx and alienation was fun compared to like now when it's like, oh, I have 100 other things I could be doing on campus and a bunch of other activities. And now you want me to come here and talk about alienation? Like, this feels like bullshit.
Yeah.
So
they're not used to it. Yeah.
Right. In that sense, I do think there's like less engagement. But in terms of like, I don't know. I mean, I haven't felt like, oh, students don't know how to be in classrooms because they were on Zoom the last 2 years of high school. Like I personally haven't felt that. But I mean, I think it's been more just like, I don't know, everybody's life is more stressed now. And that's forced me to have to manage that. I do think one thing that is interesting was when we were on Zoom, professors became a primary university contact with students. So when students had frustrations or problems that they would maybe take to, an academic advisor or someone in the dean's office or anyone else on campus, right? They didn't have that person anymore or that contact point. So professors were the people they were like talking to. So professors were the people they heard from or took it to. And I think they haven't readjusted, right? Like they're still acting like, yeah, okay, I'm gonna talk to you about this. And I'm like, Maybe you should talk to someone in the advising office.
Yeah,
But,
I don't know. Hey, look who's here.
Sorry, technical difficulties, folks.
No, we were just saying, and now that Leslie's in the C-suite, she's a busy woman. We're just happy to get some of her time.
Always got time for y'all.
Ladies and gentlemen, Leslie Hinkson, Chief Officer of Diversity. Hold on, Leslie. I think you got your Chief Diversity Officer at the League of Conservation Voters. Now, we were joking. Now you're in the C-suite in DC while we're chasing after 19-year-olds to finish their term papers.
Leslie, I was just telling Joe, I think this is the first time we've been on Zoom together, which is so crazy because like we've been in touch throughout the pandemic and now we're seeing each other. Yeah. And I was saying that like, I feel like Leslie is the one relationship that hasn't been intermediated through Zoom. And there was something special about that. But now, of course, that's been lost.
Yeah, now it's lost. Now it's lost, sorry.
Now, I know we don't have a lot of time with Leslie, so I just want to get right to this stuff. And then we'll chat when you go, Leslie. I know you're a very busy woman. But for those of you who are joining us or, haven't listened to us for a long time, Leslie Hinkson is a sociologist who moved to, like, I guess, it's like the private research, or I don't know what you'd call your sector. What would you consider it? Like what?
Well, nonprofit sector, pro-democracy, climate, grassroots and grass tops organizing, everything and the kitchen sink strategy in order to ensure that, we stave off the climate crisis. So that's what we do.
The big issue. And for those of you who are sort of embracing sociology with an eye towards enacting social change and doing better in the world, Leslie is the type of person who took that path and really went into a high impact space, as opposed to us who are mostly arguing on blogs that no one reads. And, students are, but first of all, also I want to say, Leslie is one of two people who I consider my primary teachers on the topic of race, the other being Donnell Butler. They are both extremely gifted at explaining race to white people who don't know anything about race. Like, just to show you, just to give you an example of how clueless I was. Listen, in my defense, I'm from Ottawa, Canada, and I grew up in Northern Canada. I had very little exposure to race. I didn't know anything really about the United States even. I was, sort of a parochially minded Canadian. But I remember two things that I remember from Leslie, like part of my education, but these are the funnier ones. The first one was, I remember when Leslie told me that Clarence Thomas was in fact not at the cutting edge of civil rights, leading the march for civil rights in the Supreme Court. I was like, well, yeah. Clarence Thomas is on this, isn't he? And the thing that makes Leslie so good is she's extremely patient with people like me. And then the other one I remember was I remember I was wearing NYPD merchandise when I first joined the Princeton doctoral program, completely oblivious sort of to like everything that was going on there. And it's actually, like, for those of you who don't know, it was very serious. Like a few years later, I became a professor at the City University of New York, and I had come into contact with young people of color. And during that time, New York City had a policy called stop and frisk that was, the lived experience of it was plainclothes cops would come out of nowhere and mug you. Like, it'd be like an 18-year-old boy walking along on the street and a car would pull out and two plainclothes dudes would like corner you and just go through your shit. And that was like the actual lived experience. Whenever you hear stop and frisk, what you're imagining, that's what actually happened. I remember thinking, oh, this is very serious. Like, I didn't quite understand it as somebody who didn't, but I remember Leslie was like, I remember an interaction with Leslie. She's like, so what's up with the NYPD shirt? Because she didn't know me. I guess she was trying to figure out what I was about. And I was like, well, my mom and I went to Times Square and there was an I Heart NY shirt, an NYFD shirt, and an NYPD shirt. And the I Heart NY was too touristy and I don't look good in red. So I went with the NYPD shirt. And Leslie was like, oh, okay. Do you remember any of those stories?
Yeah, and I was like, man, let me tell you a little bit about growing up in New York.
Yeah, I was like,
You know.
Joe,
know,
we've
just
talked
give you a little bit of
extensively about these
context.
stories.
I didn't know, for me, NYPD was like Law and Order. I was like, all right, they're on the case. They're solving crimes. They're on I just didn't, you don't know what you don't know. And even when at that time, I was in a Princeton doctoral program, so you would presume that I was well educated. I wasn't dumb, and I knew about some things, but people don't know. There's a lot about race that I just had no clue about, So Leslie was the one of the people who just walked me through that very well, and I'll always be grateful. But the moral of the story there is, when you go to grad school, you don't just you don't just learn from your professors. You learn from your colleagues, and sometimes your colleagues are your best teachers. But anyhow, now she is chief. What's your title, Leslie?
So my title is actually, because, diversity is good and all, but like that can't be the end all be all. So I'm actually Chief Officer for Racial Justice and Equity, right? Which is a mouthful. I sure wish that there was like a better way, right? What is it? The acronym is like CORG or CORGE, right? I mean, you know what I mean? But, it's a mouthful, and it's what I do. So, I mean, I support our CEO, two other chiefs. We work very closely together to make sure that whatever commitments we have to doing our work in a certain way, that we're actually doing it. And when we don't do it, make sure that there's like some folks taking responsibility for that.
That's awesome. And I know we don't have time, so I just want to get right to the one question that I want to make sure that we have on the live stream today. If there are doctoral students out there who are, they're saying, you know what, I don't want to do that. Like I thought the academy was more of a place where social change could occur, and it might not be exactly what I thought it was going to be. And I still really want to engage in, justice and change and stuff. What advice would you give to someone who, is in that position, knowing that you've sort of really made your way into that world?
So I'd say two things. Like, number one, like, come on, like when people ask me, would I do it all over again? I'm like, of course I would, right? I had 6 years to like read what I wanted to read, write about stuff, like interact with some of the most interesting and brilliant folks, around the country, right? So would I do it again? Yes. And I would still live in Butler with no insulation and poor heating, right? So that's number one. So, you know what I mean? Embrace the good, right? You know what I mean? Don't forget the bad, but embrace the good. And the second thing is, think about the skills that you have. I think that very often, like folks who, especially if they, didn't take, any time really between undergrad and grad school, they assume that the only thing that they're made for now is for an academic career. Think about what skills you've developed, right? Like both in academia and also whatever it is you're doing on the side. I can tell you, like as a junior faculty member, for example, it's not just the research, but I was like, oh, I know how to manage people. I know how to supervise people. It's like that, senior thesis. That is some supervision and management. I understand how to work collaboratively to like think about organizational change. I mean, those of us who have had to do a lot of service in the past, I was on faculty senate, I was on the steering committee, right? These are all translatable skills. So write down all the things you've been doing and like think about what skills are associated with it and make it work for whatever job it is out there that you're trying to get. Make your existing skill set from what it is you've got through through graduate school, but also the service that you may have done. Figure out how that translates into what it is they're asking for in this application. And if you need any advice on that, I don't know how folks can actually get in touch with me, but we'll figure that out.
Reach out to us on social media. We'll be sort of an intermediate. One thing you should know about Leslie is Leslie was always smart enough to avoid the drug of Twitter. It's like
not doing that.
And now that fever dream is ending, you're looking like the one who was smart about it the whole time.
Figured something.
I mean, how many hours did we pour into it? Did you see that tweet. There's a tweet from like a biologist who was really active in telling the public about like vaccines being safe, Carl Bergstrom. And he was like, man, I did a lot of stuff on Twitter. Like that was part of like the public scholarship record or the scientific record in small ways. And like, it's all coming down like a house of cards. So who knows?
Yeah. I mean, low key, I'm just kind of like, well, high key, I'm kind of like, I don't really give a shit. I mean, if the worst thing that happens to me this year is Twitter leaves my life, I'll count that as like an awesome year. But it's all, I mean, I don't know. I was thinking like, it will, a lot of time back, it'll be interesting for me to think about like how I'll find out about news stuff, but maybe more importantly, actually, sociology stuff, right? And so like, oh, what's happening in sociology? What do people care about? What are people fighting about? Like, those were things you could kind of pick up at arm's length on Twitter, which was nice because it was like, okay, you could have a heads up of what's going on, but you do not have to like deeply commit to giving a shit. And that was like a perfect sweet spot, which I'm not sure how like that'll be recreated, where it's like, oh, there's this article everybody's talking about, or like whatever. I mean, news stuff, I feel like I'll be fine. Like I read newspapers before Twitter, newspapers and magazines before Twitter. I guess I'll go back to that. You know? But
it was a bad source of news, you know. Twitter was not a good place to get your news. But you're right about the keeping up with the colleagues, because now the blog system, there used to be a blog system that's fallen apart. Remember? I don't know. They'll be stuck with us on YouTube.
I was going to say, I guess podcast, right? I should like sort of refurbish my podcast list.
Well, first of all, let's talk about that because I want to get Leslie on this also before she escapes. So if you don't know, Leslie and Corey hosted an amazing podcast series that ran before COVID. It was called The B-Side. It was a terrific podcast. You had some really good episodes. You talked to some really good people. Remember, you had a great episode with John Eason. Who was
Victor
John?
Ray was a great one.
All right, Victor Ray. We had Waverly on. We had Gene for sure.
It was really great, and it was like just a place. It was just like it was a great way to key in on a corner of sociology that I didn't know about, and I really loved hearing it. Of course, the B-Side got taken down in the great lawsuit of the great catastrophic lawsuit of 2019. That you know, you guys were doing like 200 people an episode, 300 people an episode. After like 7-8 episodes, you had totally found an audience, and so did Daniel Friedman's Spanish language podcast, Sociología con acento. And then we got sued. But now, statute of limitations.
People like to talk abstractly about how like the legal system and shit in the U.S. is keeping down Black and Latino voices. But you got like a for real example here. Like that's what was going on. Lawsuits.
Case study for those sociology of law classes.
Just trying to silence Black voices. That's all.
Well, statute of limitations. First of all, just if anybody wants to hear the story of this, I will tell it at ESS. And the only reason that I'm going to tell it at ESS is because if I do it fully and unambiguously through my job, then the college lawyers can't put any vindictive lawyers that come after me on my shoulders like they did the first time. I'm smart enough now. I know how this works. Like all of this goes through CUNY Properties now. I'm like, oh, you're not getting out of anything.
They trying to silence white voices now. What is going on?
You know, you think that's really it, but all it really is no one wants to do a job. You're like, I got this. They're like, oh, hell no, I'm not helping you. Good luck. You know, like, they're like, oh, there we go. I don't have to help you. Bye. That's really what it is. So it's like, but in any case, I would love for you guys to bring that back. It was such an awesome series, and I think if we do it the right way, we can avoid all of those landmines. So is that something?
I was going to say, just let us get the lawyers to tell us what we can't do this time, and
you know, the law.
Yeah, let us know. I mean, because we're definitely up for it. And, you know, for any Black sociology folks watching this or listening to this, be on the lookout, because I think we're coming back, and it seems like, in the past couple of years, there have been like a lot of new folks entering the field. So there'll be plenty of new people to talk to. And I imagine we'll want to revisit with some old favorites. So, what I loved about the B-side was, one, just unapologetically hanging out and talking to cool people about what they're doing. And, it was, Black sociology, by and for Black sociologists, but anybody else was welcome to listen and hear what was going on. So it was always a fun time. And I think, a lot of stuff has happened over the past couple of years. And so it'll be interesting to hear how that's been affecting the way people have been doing their work. But also, I imagine it's what a bunch of people are working on now. So I'll be really, really curious to hear, what's going on and talk to folks about it. So we're definitely game for it. Busy executives, non-academics, we'll have to figure out like scheduling and stuff between important lobbyist meetings and saving the environment and everything.
Saving democracy. Right. But what I was going to say, what I thought was, there were two other things, and maybe one of those things is what got us in legal trouble. But we always shared great music, right?
Yeah, that's what did it. That was the problem. That was the problem.
That was the problem. And also number two, I do remember having conversations with folks over the years about how, sometimes we need to figure out how to stop, centering whiteness and everything that we do in sociology. People would be like, what the hell are you talking about? And so it was a space where no one had to ask, what the hell are you talking about? Right? We just were like, oh, here's the space, here's the place. So yeah.
The music was the issue. The copyright music was the issue.
It was so good though, Joe.
I know, that was the best idea. And it went with the title.
The system loved hearing Black people be Black, and it was all like, this is awesome, this is great. But the moment we played music, it was like, wait, are we getting our money from this?
Yeah, that's my property. That's mine right there.
But you're like, we played like 15 seconds of it. What?
Doesn't matter.
Anyways, I'm not going to complain.
Come to the ESS. I'll give you the whole rundown, and because it exposed me to well, first of all, it's in Baltimore, so I very much hope that I can see you.
I will be there.
Oh, that's so good. Corey, are you going to be at the ESS this year?
I'm close to Baltimore, so I'll definitely be up for hanging out. I'm absolutely not committing to going to a conference, but if you want to meet up for drinks.
Dan, how about you? What's your
That commute's a little far. Actually, I think it's at the same time or very close to the Pacific Sociological Association meeting, and I am pretty much required to be there as the treasurer-elect. So I'll be taking office as treasurer. But I did want to say, I have students who sometimes do creative projects, and they put out Spotify playlists associated with those projects. And wouldn't it be awesome if the B-side had a Spotify playlist?
So it did until we took it down. That's
not to broadcast but not to broadcast like during the show.
Right.
Because you can find people's playlists, just they're kind of out there.
It's a good idea, Dan.
Oh, I see what you mean.
How we get around it.
And then you just link to it in the show notes.
Right.
That's legal.
That's legal? I hope so.
That's legal, yeah.
Okay, good.
Man, are you a lawyer?
Now I am. I'm an amateur intellectual property lawyer now. Though, I also, part of the reason why I'm really excited about bringing back the B-side is over the past few weeks on the show, we've been processing attendance data from the country's top schools. And one thing, when you look at that data, you realize that the absolute meat of this discipline is in diverse public schools. And that there are tiny departments in primarily white male schools, but the size of those departments is very small. Like, it's shockingly small, like famous departments with as many students as faculty, like 30 kids. And the 400 or 500 student enrolled, or the hundreds enrolled, are at large public schools and ones that serve diverse people. So I think race is really at the center of where Soch is right now. I think it's the biggest draw and it's where the weight of the people who are buying our products are at. So I think it's important for us to have a voice for people of color, because that's the meat. That's the real meat of the discipline, not the elite professors, but the actual customers. It looks like that's where that is. So I'd love you to do it. I'd love you to come back and do it. Would you do it on YouTube like this?
I don't know.
Right. We need to like get heads together and think about this. This feels like a, 2-beer conversation to start, and then we'll see where we end up. And I suspect, we'll come up with something good by the end of it. But yeah, I mean, I'm open to a range of things. I mean, and I totally get your point, Joe. I mean, in some ways, that's sort of like a point, when we started the show. I mean, our experience of living as sociologists echoed that. So it's really exciting to think about doing it in a context where like everybody gets that. So yeah, no, I mean, I'm definitely down for it. And we can think about what we want it to look like. I mean, I don't want it to be too fussy or too extra, but just the idea of finding a space to hang out with Leslie, talk to her, and talk to cool people in sociology doing interesting stuff feels like a win, right?
Well, that's the point of this, really.
I mean, what I will say is like, so Corey was letting that like all during COVID, we managed like not to be on Zoom, but like either talk on the phone or we met in person like a lot, right?
Yeah.
And all I have to say is I no longer want to deprive the world from all of the things that I get from my conversations with Corey. Like, they're hilarious and like insightful and like cathartic, and you know what I mean? And so yeah, I'm ready to share Corey again.
Yeah. Well, he's objectively good at podcasting. I remember that. I was like, oh, there's a couple. It's funny, like you run into people doing podcasts who are quite good writers, and they do not shine on this medium. Corey, I mean, he's done both. I actually wanted to just give a shout out to his book for the last time and ask him what he was doing, but Corey's super duper strong on this medium as well, as are you, Leslie, and you, Dan. So it's a pleasure. But Corey, what are you working on now? Wait, can I plug your old book? I don't want to have you live in the past. Like, I don't want to, but like, so Corey, for those of you who don't know, Corey had an excellent book that came out, I believe, in 2017, right?
2016. The timing was perfect. Like, I thought it was a failure and like super delayed, but my publisher was like, no, we're really happy to have a book about politics in the fall of 2016. So yeah, came out just before the election, actually.
I remember a lot of people were like looking to you. They were like, "What's happening?" It was like, "What happened?" But so Corey's book, I think Black Elephants in the Room: The Unexpected Politics of African American Republicans. It was a great book that, like all good sociology does, it breaks your preconceptions. It breaks your preconceptions of republicanism, breaks your preconceptions of the Black community's politics. And I mean, you're also somebody who taught me about race, Corey, and it's a really good book. What are you working on now?
Right now, I had started a project that was looking at sort of professional work and social identity, right? Like what happens when your professional identity and social identity overlap, but it was like a workplace ethnography that was starting just as COVID began. So that kind of got put on ice. I mean, the questions and the topic is interesting, and I'm still trying to figure out how to make that happen. But obviously I couldn't go in and watch people at work, and now people aren't working in the same way. So I need to rethink what that project looks like. But in the interim, I've been working with the American Voices Project, which is this, essentially it's a large scale interview study, right? Like we have a nationally representative sample of interviews in the US. And our goal is to make those interviews publicly available, the transcript of those interviews publicly available. Actually, we're talking through, like, is it transcripts or recordings? But Right. The point is to like essentially have a qualitative GSS type thing, right? That like anybody can use. So we collected data from January 2020 through August 2021, which was like, an amazing time to have nationally representative data of Americans just talking about their lives. And now the PI team, it's being run out of Stanford and Princeton, but the PI team comes from a range of places. But we're trying to figure out like how to raise money to make the data available to everybody, and doing a lot of grant applications and thinking through ways of continuing data collection, right? Like to have this be an ongoing thing. So working on that, and then using some of that data to work on my own project. So I'm working on, I guess the working sort of idea now is like 2020, what the fuck, right? That sort of like examines over the course of the year how attitudes and conversations change over topics like racial inequality and COVID specifically, right? But looking at, in January to March, what were people saying about these things? March to June, what were they saying, right? Because what's interesting is there was actually a pretty quick change in some of certainly the discourse around both those topics, right, over the course of the year. And so in some ways, it's sort of this interesting, like quasi-longitudinal thing, right? Like talking to people steadily over the course of the year about these same topics and seeing how conversations change about that. So American Voices Project has been eating up a lot of my like intellectual research time. So I've been working on that a lot. So so that's cool. I mean, if you're interested, there's a website whose address I can't remember off the top of my head, but if you Google American Voices Project, you'll land in the right place. Or you can email me, but Google it first, don't email me.
That's kind of intriguing. A nationally representative qualitative survey, because most surveys are like somewhat convenient sampled, or we're doing something similar for the podcast book. We randomly sampled off the iTunes subgenre charts, and when you randomly sample, you find it, there is something to it, because you find stuff that you didn't even know was I was like, that's a podcast. Weird.
It's been really interesting for me as like a qualitative researcher, right? Like it's a different way to get qualitative data, and in some ways has actually had to shift the way I do my own work and like think about research, right? Because it's like normally when I go into an interview, like the Black Republicans Project, I sort of, knew what I was interested in, knew what questions I wanted to ask, and so like ask those specific questions, right? But using AVP data, it's sort of a different model, because like, the interview protocol is, well structured and thought through by a team of folks, right? But it is kind of just like asking people to talk about general stuff. I think the opening question is something like, tell me what's going on in your life, right? And so, there's just like a range of open-ended questions that get asked. And so as, someone using the data, you can come to it with specific questions, right? And sort of be like, well, I'll see if people talk about this, and maybe they will, maybe they won't. Or you could come at it more inductively and be like, I'll see what's here, and maybe something will emerge through like reading these kinds of things. But in some ways, it's like a different way, for me anyway, it's been like a different way to think about how I go about doing qualitative research, right? And it's also been really interesting to think through sort of methodological questions, right? So in addition to the interview stuff, everybody fills out a survey. So we have this situation where we ask people, how do you identify, what's your partisan identification? And they say Republican, Independent, Democrat, right? And so now I can be like, okay, well, now let me look at how you answer these open-ended questions and see if that's consistent with what you say in the survey. Or personally, I've been really fascinated by this idea. It's like, what's a political independent like? So I can like pull everybody who surveys says they're independent and then look at how they talk about politics.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah. That's cool. The one thing that I would imagine, though, it's hard for me to imagine how it isn't really like it's a qualitative interview, but it's kind of just an open-ended question survey at the same. Like you can't, when you find a string, you can't pull it to somewhere where you haven't been, or.
I mean, people, well, interviewers do follow up on, so the interviewers are trained in like, interview skills, and so they follow up with probes and questions, and so it's, it's structured for sure. It's not like a loose, let's just bullshit for an hour and 30 minutes, right? And so in some ways it's like interview survey, but I think there's flexibility that allows for, interviews to go in different directions. And, we have some nimbleness with the protocol itself. So we can change up modules and add in questions if something's happening, right? So it's like, okay, we should probably be asking about these like Capitol protesters in January. So like, let's, change the questionnaire up a little bit. So it's, in some ways, it's a nice balance between like, these are the set questions everyone's going to get, and we'll just go through them in order, and a little bit of flexibility of like, oh, let me probe this interesting story about like, when your car got repossessed, or let me, tell me about, there are a lot of tell me questions, right? So it's like, tell me about a time when something happens, which gets people answering questions, but also telling you stories. So it's a nice, it's a nice balance. We have a team of folks who, some survey folks, some qualitative folks. So it's a good balance, I think. And I think it's offering something a little bit different, right? Like a kind of data we don't normally get. Because normally our like, qualitative data, certainly in mass culture way, comes from like reporters who like will do an article with like people they can find locally or whatever, which I think is important. And I don't want to diminish, sort of like small scale interview things. I think those things really matter, but you get a very specific thing. But what we're trying to do is, leverage the benefits of that and combine it with the benefits of like survey research. So we'll see, actually. We'll know soon enough if we can get granting agencies to pay for it. And if we can't convince them, then this is all, you can just delete this from YouTube. I'll go back to doing my small scale interview studies and saying that's the only way to do real research. Yeah. So
well, Corey, that would be a terrible outcome, because I remember when the AVP was recruiting for interviewers, and it was like one of the first or maybe the second time I taught my inequality and social justice class. And I was super, super excited because of the team and because of the kinds of questions that they were asking and because of the design. And for me, like, please a funder, please someone fund the transcription of these interviews and the public release of this data, because I can imagine so many very, very rich projects coming from graduate students and even undergraduate students. So selfishly, I want this to work so that I can send my students into this data. And some of them send it out with a specific question, as you say. Others who are more maybe inductively oriented, just saying, all right, take a sample and read.
Yeah, no, and actually, in some ways, and that's one of the things we're hoping getting it out will let people do, right? Because people on the PI team have been able to, use it with their undergrad classes, like undergrad research methods classes, undergrad, like qualitative interview classes, right? And they've had really, really great experiences with it. I know David Grusky's done a bunch of classes at Stanford with it. I think some Princeton students, undergrad students have been involved with it. So, it's definitely something, that I think has a use and an appeal for undergrad researchers and undergrad students, as well as like grad students and professors as well. So, I definitely feel like it's one of these things where, it speaks to a lot of people, right? Like it's something a lot of people can use. And, and like I said, I've had, the feedback I've gotten from folks who have worked with it. We made a big announcement with Russell Sage to do like a special issue, a Russell Sage journal issue. And we had the conference, I guess last week, right? Like in New York. So people were presenting initial research that they had been doing with the AVP data. And it was fucking awesome, right? Like all over the place, like people doing stuff on gig workers, people doing stuff on experiences of inequality during COVID, people doing stuff on police brutality, like responses to police brutality in 2020, people doing stuff on just like general political attitudes. Oh, there's a project on like how people process luck in their lives and talk about being lucky, right? Like this is all stuff that, happening with the data. And so it's been really amazing to see a range of scholars find this useful, right? So like computer science people are super into it because they're just like, oh, wait, national representative interview sample with people just talking so we can teach computers how to recognize what people mean when they say stuff. Fuck yeah, give me this.
Oh, Corey, don't give them that. Don't give them that, Corey. Do not give them that. But we should connect because I might also have some ideas about potential funders, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, but I'm hoping I get to see you soon. And folks, I gotta jump. I'm late for my last meeting. But
thank you, Leslie. We love you. We miss you.
Non-academic sociology.
I miss y'all.
We miss you too.
Be with you, Leslie.
All right. We'll talk about B-side soon.
Bye, Leslie. Oh, what a treat. Like when I started podcasting, I would say 1/3 of the reason I did it was just to have an excuse to see Leslie.
She's awesome. Yeah,
I love her so much.
Looking forward to doing B-side again. I think, it was great to do it with her. I feel like it was like great to talk to other meet new sociology people. Yeah. And, I think in some ways it provided, we didn't even realize the sort of what it was providing for people and like how people were into it. I still get emails through or notices through the B-side Twitter account about stuff like people are like, hey, when are episodes coming back up? Or I use this for a class, like da 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 da. And so it's like, oh, okay, right. This is doing something. So, and the work that Leslie's doing now with the nonprofit she's at sounds important and fucking fascinating. And it's like really awesome to see, a sociologist in the world, right?
Yeah, somebody as competent as her too. Leslie was always competent though, just so you know. She had like business consulting gigs when we were in school. Like just companies were giving her money to solve problems while she was a student at Princeton. She had like a whole forget about it. Like we're not all Leslies, but like I'm glad she's doing well. She was one of those people, somebody who's your age but is a little bit of a parental figure. That's Leslie for me. Anyhow, all right, guys. Well, we're coming up on 12:40, so I think I gotta wrap it up. But I hope that you can come back again, Corey and Dan.
Definitely.
Always a pleasure, sir. Yeah, thank you for coming. I think we're gonna take a Christmas break, a holiday break, and I'm not gonna do anything. I think until maybe the second week in January. Plan on spending next week staring at the ceiling right after I get my grading done.
Right.
My colleague Robin Rogers circulated a funny meme on Facebook. You know that? You know what? Forget about it. It's not good to talk about memes. Forget it. Let's just wrap it up. All right. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you, guys.
Good luck with the semester, you both.
Thank you. All right. You've been listening to the Annex of Sociology podcast. The Annex is a production of the Queens Podcast Lab. For more information, please visit queenspodcastlab.org. On behalf of my colleagues, Corey Fields, Leslie Hinkson, and Daniel R. Morrison, I'm Joe Cohen. Thanks for listening. Oh, wait, I didn't turn off the live stream. Hold on. All right, now I'm really going, everybody on YouTube.